Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Festival of Work session on resilience, and in particular, workplace resilience. I'm Nick Dean, and I'm the product owner for engagement here at MHR, and I'm also going to be your host for the next 30 minutes or so. Joining us today, I'm delighted to introduce Rob Robson. Rob is Director of People Science at the People Experience Hub, and my fellow colleagues here at MHR, Rebecca Carter, Product Owner for Talent, and Alan Mullen, Product Owner for Learning. So jumping straight in. Resilience is a wide and varied topic. So in today's session, we're going to be presenting hopefully valuable insights on the factors that influence how resilient we are as individuals, and more importantly, how we as a HR community can create resilient workplaces to support our businesses now and in the future. Putting COVID aside for one moment, in the workplace, we're often presented with circumstances that test and challenge our resilience. Changing job roles, being part of the dreaded restructure, downsizing or merging with other businesses are but a few. However, couple this together with the global health and economic crisis currently taking place, and it's easy to see why people are struggling to cope and unable to make the necessary changes. What this clearly highlights is resilience is a must-have skill if we're to survive and grow, both on a personal and professional level. But why should we care? Why should businesses be placing resilience at its core? Well, in a recent study commissioned by MHR, 82% of the most resilient organisations rate very highly for customer satisfaction compared to their competitors. 76 of the most resilient organisations rate very highly for brand reputation against their competitors. 76% of the most resilient organisations rate very highly for employee engagement. And 86% of the most resilient organisations rate very highly for employees having a positive attitude to work. Now, don't worry, all of these stats and findings are contained within our recent Workforce Resilience Report and e-guide, which will be available for you to download after this session. So let's get started. And I guess it's sensible to start at the beginning. So what exactly do we mean by resilience? Well, the definition that best describes resilience for me is the Merriam-Webster, which distills it down to the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. So Rob, if I can turn to you first, I've been fortunate enough to attend many of your talks on resilience, and I've always found them incredibly inspiring. So can I invite you to kick us off and explain what your take is on workplace resilience?
You know, there's a lot of debate about exactly what resilience is. At an individual level, we tend to talk about mental resilience, and it's both a protective factor and that sort of reactive factor that helps us adjust after a difficult situation. But a lot of the debate that we see is very much focused on the individual, and I think what's actually true is that when we talk about workplace resilience, is that there are three levels at play here. One is the individual and their mental resilience. The next is the team, and the third is the organisation. And team resilience is more than the sum of the mental resilience of its individual members. It's also about team processes, things like communication and support. And organisational resilience is more still. It's also about structures and processes and systems, technologies, culture, leadership, all those things that help the system as a whole to anticipate, cope with, and learn from challenging situations. So it's really important to think beyond individual resilience, because while it's true to say that that resilient individuals contribute to resilient teams, and resilient teams contribute to resilient organizations, it's probably more true to say that organizational resilience drives resilient teams and drive individual resilience. If you only focus on individual resilience and you don't pay attention to the wider organizational context and environment, you're likely to test even the limitations of even the most resilient individuals. I think resilience is a particularly important and useful concept because it does put performance and well-being on the same page. And when we talk about performance, talk about a broad range of things. We're talking about things like creativity, innovation, readiness for change, and agility. So I think resilience is a really useful and an important concept because it puts performance in a very holistic sense on the same page. Not as competing, but as complementary topics, and they're often seen as being a trade-off in there. I've also heard people respond quite negatively to the label of resilience as if it only means strength or toughness, and that by focusing on resilience, we're not dealing with things like care and compassion. And that's not true. And if you dig beneath the surface, it's a much broader and nuanced concept than that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Rob. And thanks for that. I think it's important that we look beyond resilience being at an individual level. And what can we do as HR community, as the HR community, to create resilient workplaces? Really, where we're going with this. And so we found that there were three things that help this: leaders and managers, practicalities, and the role of technology. So, Alan, look, if I can turn to you and ask, what role in business the leaders and managers play in creating high resilient workforces?
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick. I just wanted to kind of pick up on a couple of things you guys have already talked about, which is about how leaders believe that building resilience is an individual thing, something that's time consuming and something that takes a lot of practice. The reality is that that needs to start from the top, and leaders need to play a part in that journey. Resilience, I think, is an essential characteristic of high performing leaders. They need to act as the exemplars of resilient behavior, and then that will help them not only to personally advance and thrive, but to help protect the energy of the people within their teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true that, one of the things we often forget is that, leaders are people too. And we often think about what we expect from the workforce and what the workforce needs. But actually, in a difficult situation, it's, the leaders are often struggling with this too.
Yeah, it's a great shout, Rob. And I think, to be honest, that's borne out in our recent Workforce Resilience Index report. I think Nick's alluded to this already, but 76% of resilient organisations rate highly for employee engagement. And I think it's this engagement that becomes crucial for building resilient teams. Culture has a huge part to play in that as well. And we have a duty of care to our employees to build a nurturing environment where it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them, ask for help and support, or even to request flexibility for personal commitments.
It's psychological safety, isn't it? And it's that is a huge factor in organizational resilience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that we need to do as leaders is set the tone for what is acceptable. And I think your own behaviour can set expectations for your teams, and that quickly becomes the norm and can have a damaging effect on resilience. I'm sure we can all think of instances where an email arrived late at night, or where you're asked to attend a meeting at short notice and had to rearrange a personal commitment. In that instance, leaders need to consider their own behaviour and think carefully about the values that they want their employees to reflect, and they need to demonstrate those accordingly. We need to be aware of what the psychologists call facilitative factors, as they can help us predict how resilient an individual might be. These factors centre around confidence in job role, structure of work routines, and social and family support. It's important for leaders to tap into these, particularly the first two areas, but be mindful of social and family aspects, as they can undermine the resilience of employees. And this is very true during moments of crisis.
Yeah, there's a huge body of work around the whole concept of job demands and resources, and that when those are in balance, the psychological, the social, the organizational, and the physical aspects of work that are either taking from us or giving in the form of resources. When they're in balance, we feel more resilient and more engaged in our work.
Yeah, totally agree on that, Rob. And I think as well, one of the things that, again, talking about reinforcement from leaders, should be regularly checking in with our employees to understand if they are comfortable with their current working situation, work from home, hybrid working, how they're planning to schedule their upcoming days, and if they require any support with life or family commitments. This can give leaders a bit of foresight of the work that's currently on the table, and where there's a need to potentially redistribute any of that to prevent an individual from becoming overwhelmed. I think leaders can strengthen teams by being compassionate, giving employees time, and helping them to get the tools they need to succeed in the new normal world. Leaders should never assume that employees showing high levels of resilience are going to be okay and do not need the same support. Resilient people are geared towards action and elements that they can control, but as a result, they can burn out during times of crisis, and leaders need to be aware of this.
So I think everything that Alan said there is absolutely spot on. I think when you think about a lot of that was about leaders as people managers effectively, and setting the tone and the culture. I think there is a big leadership shift needed, which is, and part of that is about having the humility and vulnerability to accept and admit that they don't have the answers to the big questions. And there are going to be a lot of big questions that many businesses have to ask over the next, coming 3 years or, a few years. And at that organizational level, and they have to be able to invite a diverse range of opinions and voices to contribute, to developing those solutions. And so it requires quite a different approach to leadership to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And Alan, I love the bit that you touched on around the importance of regular check-ins. Especially with so many of us working from home, it's really important that leaders and managers make that time to check in on their team. So if I can move to you, Rebecca, and just move us on really to talk about the practical terms and how we make this happen in business, and things like how do we ensure resilience is part of the everyday conversation?
Yeah, so thank you, Nick. And I think it's absolutely key when we're considering that organisational level to be thinking about the tone that we're setting, how consistent we're being with our messaging and our approach, and also about our expectations. And all of those have a key part to play within this resilience topic. And it links into nicely what you were mentioning earlier about the individual and that clarity and purpose piece. I think it's really fundamental that organisations consider that as their responsibility as well, to trickle that down and instill that purpose throughout to whichever level you're operating at.
Yeah.
And so,
sorry. Yeah, and I think it's hard to understate that that sense of vision and purpose, because right now there's so much uncertainty around. People need the solidity that a good, clear vision can provide them in terms of taking those steps forward that they need to.
Yeah, or simply a message. Doesn't have to be as big as a vision.
And so to take that and get a bit more practical with that in terms of how do we deliver that, how do we achieve that, I think it's important to conduct just a bit of a self-reflection exercise in your organisation and consider any existing ways of working, look at your capability and performance data and reflect on where your strengths and weaknesses are broadly. And also just glance back over previous experiences of change management that you've handled in your organisation. And we've all got a great example of managing change in the last year or so. But even beyond that, even smaller chunks of change, what went well, what didn't go so well, what resonated with your employees and what was quite difficult for them to digest. And from that, and from lifting from that data and those insights, I think you can find some really key takeaway actions in terms of how you then manage change in the future. And it's really important, I suppose, to walk the walk with that and hold yourself accountable to those points when you're approaching change, and just pause and consider all of those aspects that you've identified from past reflection.
And the work that I've been reading on organizational resilience really emphasizes that whole piece on reflection and learning, and it's really, I think, a challenging thing to do, that whether you're coming off the back of a difficult change program or coming out of a pandemic where you've had to adapt and cope quickly and make changes just to get by. It's very easy to move on. And that bias for action that we have can mean that we miss the opportunities to really reflect and then embed the learning into the organization that actually then contributes us to being more resilient as a result.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with that there. And I think when we're considering other practical ways that we can bring this conversation and bring these aspects into the workplace, I'd really like to speak around that well-being piece that Rob mentioned at the start of today. And I think you can't undervalue that in terms of placing well-being at the heart of resilience. And things that you can take away and look into for your organisation are things like, training up mental health first aiders and making sure that they've got a presence at various levels across your organisation. Also reflecting on the existing resources you have. So considering your employee assistance programme, if you have one, does it actually fulfil all the needs and requirements of your particular workforce, or are there other things it could be doing for you? And also, are people aware of what it can do for them? And have you done enough to communicate that and spread awareness of that throughout your teams? And finally, I suppose with that well-being piece, linking back to what Alan was saying, it's absolutely about that crucial check-in point. It's about the conversations that managers are having with employees, how frequently they're having them, and what they're discussing, and how able they are to support them. And I think once you piece all of those steps together and really support the well-being presence across your workforce, you will see strides towards resilience as well.
That's excellent, Rebecca. Thanks so much for that. And it was made incredibly clear on what we can be doing practically within the workforce. Now, that leaves us with the final point, which is technology. Now, this plays such a prominent role in all of our lives. But I'll be interested to know, what are the key technologies that you've seen help individuals and workplace resilience? Rebecca, I know this is one close to your heart. So do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. And so as you mentioned there, technology, it's core to the way that we live now, isn't it? It's absolutely embedded in everything that we're doing, but particularly now from that workplace perspective, we've considered sort of the environment building of resilience and all the different factors that contribute to that. And for most people now, technology is your environment. It's where we're operating, it's where we're interacting with our workplace and our brand. And so it really can't be played down, the importance of how much we need to value the position of technology as a key enabler in your business strategy, in your people strategy, and in considering your change management as well. And so with this in mind, I actually think it can be quite useful to consider technology as a parallel with that physical space, and really examine, I suppose, your technological environment in the same way as that physical one, to think, are we providing enough spaces for learning and development? Have we got, communication and support methods at the point of need? And how are we distributing internal messaging, and is that reaching everybody? And when you are considering all of those different aspects and areas in your technology, think about the feeling, think about, how do your employees feel in that space? Do they have easy access to the tools that they need to succeed and be confident in their role and their duties? And are there actually any obstacles that you might not have noticed before that might be undermining their confidence or impacting that ability to cope with change?
So, I mean, it is really interesting how important technology is to our environment, and how much of our work actually runs, it requires technology to work well. And yet how many organizations, something we've seen in some of our data is how many organizations are prepared to let processes and technologies that people need every day be less than optimal. And actually what you're doing there is just adding daily hassles and constraints to the way that people work. So technology is both an enabler, as you say, and if it's not managed well, can be a disabler.
Yeah, completely. I think it's been a blocker for a lot of people, especially as they were fast tracked into it with COVID. And I think it really showed a lot of organisations they just weren't prepared for it. But
yeah, no, I agree with you, Nick. And I think to build on that, the historic adding of technologies has also played against a lot of organisations in the last year, because they wouldn't necessarily have seen that knock-on impact of just slowly adding system after system and bolting it all together. And so actually my first recommendation, I suppose, to everyone watching, if you are thinking about technology as helping you build that path towards a more resilient workforce, is to look at trying to host everything under one roof. So, reduce as many barriers as you can in your teams accessing the information they need, and create that unified employee experience that they would have had in that physical space. So, whether it's their check-in history and conversations with managers, or their pay information, or access to training and learning courses, or even just company policies, make sure that that's all accessible in one shared space with one system, one app, and crucially, I suppose, one login experience. And so we've seen this firsthand at MHR from customers who have done exactly that and struggled to piece together all of their different systems, whether it's engagement and learning and payroll, and it's had that really fractured employee experience. And by introducing that one space, one login experience, and one central point of information, engagement has increased. They've reduced key admin time as a bonus, but they've also managed to keep their culture alive through implementing this technology.
When we think about that concept of team resilience as well, which is about communication, support, people being able to connect with each other, really on a day-to-day level. And when we're probably, for a lot of people, entering into a period of more hybrid working, that is so fundamental. I mean, I some people like to work from home. Some people enjoy the splendid isolation of being sort of disconnected from people. But most of the people I've actually spoken to are saying how difficult it actually is to get things done, and to actually have that empathy with your colleagues when you're away from each other. So anything that helps bridge that gap can only be helpful.
So I think it might just be nice just to finish things off, I suppose, with technology. We've spoken about the environment and about the social side and the accessibility, but I don't think we can skip over sort of data and reporting insights either from that organisational standpoint. And so that's really, I see, where technology comes into its own as the enabler of your vision through the insights that it can be surfacing for you. And I think having the right system in place, you can get yourself away from that monotonous experience of stringing together spreadsheets and trying to find some sort of coherent trend in how your people are feeling, and actually instead be presented with key and dynamic insights at relevant moments in time. So these could be around performance or retention, or any changes or interruptions to your succession planning that you had scoped out. And I think being able to be made aware of that through your technology from an organisation point of view at the time it happens really just sets you up for success. And combined with all of these other aspects we've discussed, it puts you in such a strong position to be able to manage change in an effective way and get ahead of any problems before they arise. So I think that's probably an area of technology that will continue to grow in the next few years, but it's absolutely invaluable for organisations looking to develop resilience.
Yeah, I may be biased, but that's absolutely, the importance of employee feedback really can't be overemphasized.
No, that's great, Rebecca, and you make some excellent points there. Really interesting, and I think it's given us a real clear steer on the importance of resilience in the workplace. However, as a final leaving gesture for the audience that are listening, can I ask each of you just for what you see as your key takeaway for them? Rob, can I open that to you first?
Yeah, I think my message to leaders is that it's really important not to see resilience as the responsibility of an individual employee, but actually about building that environment, building one that will support and enable people to be more resilient, getting that balance between challenging and supporting people, and making sure they're equipped to deal with the demands that are placed upon them.
Yeah, no, absolutely excellent. Alan, what would your take?
Yeah, I'd echo what Rob just said, but also to say, to add to that, not be afraid to adapt your leadership style. This is really to kind of encourage openness, trust, and psychological safety. And I think from the coaching learning perspective, being a coaching manager isn't really about learning to be a great coach, but learning how to ask questions, listen, and provide the appropriate feedback. Great. Rebecca, how about yourself?
So I'd say from my side, it would just be, live and breathe it every day. Really consider all of the different ways that your organisation could be feeling from your decisions. Consider your well-being approach, and then think about the ways that technology can help you support that in that everyday conversation, and interrogate what your technology does for you now and what it could do. Thanks, Rebecca. And as for me, I think it's actually quite a perfect time for HR leaders to perhaps facilitate a period of reflection and learning, and understand how their organisation has handled the pandemic, so it can be an experience that actually builds resilience. So in summary, I think it's clear that as a HR community, we all have a critical part to play in helping create resilient individuals and organisations. Obviously, change is constant, and it's always going to be about us, whether it's in the workplace or at home. And it's those people and organisations that have developed high levels of resilience that will be able to flex and bounce back quicker and stronger. So there we have it. We've come to the end of our session, which I trust has been of interest and has provoked some thought that you can take away and implement within your organisations. I believe we have 5 minutes left for any questions from the audience. So can I open it up to the floor and ask for the first question, please?